So in my last video, I only briefly brought up what monitor check is and what it does. That's because I felt such a thing is so complex that it deserves its own video. So here it is. I'll be explaining what monitor check does in 2DX specifically. To very quickly simplify what monitor check does, it checks the refresh rate of your monitor and tries to sync to your refresh rate. This is because even if every monitor is supposed to run the game at 60 Hz, there are individual differences between each monitor, and the game tries to accommodate those changes. Emphasis on tries. So this monitor check runs for about 30 seconds at boot up, and the game stores its FPS value in memory. When a song is picked, it will load the song's data and its chart file, which has the placement of BGM sounds, samples, changes, notes, etc. They are stored in millisecond-based format. So the game uses this information along with the FPS calculated from monitor check to generate the note placements in the chart into frames. So the game is going to convert from milliseconds, that's from the song's chart file, using the information gathered from monitor check. And it's going to convert all of that into frames. Now, generally speaking, as long as your FPS is close to 60 as possible, there won't be any noticeable differences between most charts. However, there are some scenarios where a difference can be noticed, and that's what we will be talking about. The first and most obvious one is the end of Echidna's charge node points. I think most people saw this when people watched the Western Area Finals tournament for the 8th KAC in Osaka, Japan. And as most people can see, some cabinets have this and other cabinets don't. So what gives here? Well, thanks to the power of tools, I'm able to change the value of the FPS to anything I desire. Throughout my testing, and this is just based off my experience, I could be a little off, but it happens when the FPS is around greater than 60.004 to less than 59.992. Now, thankfully, the window for releasing charge nodes is so large, it really doesn't matter if some charge node endpoints are staggered by a frame or two. Still, it looks jarring, and many people still have no idea why this happens. This goes all the way back to the charts themselves being in millisecond-based formats. And because in Echidna's chart file, the endpoints do not end at the exact same timestamp, then depending on the FPS given by the monitor check, this will determine where the endpoints will lie on a frame-based system, and that can get staggered. However, there is one example where it actually does affect how most people would play, and that is Tamayura another. It only occurs for a brief section of the chart near the beginning. However, it is jarring to play with one frame staggers everywhere. Thankfully, this doesn't occur nearly as often. So throughout my testing, I've found that this staggers happen around 60.006 or greater, and 59.985 and less. Again, we have a similar case to what's going on with Echidna. There are implications with having the charts themselves being defined in milliseconds and not having them placed perfectly at the same timestamps. Or are they placed perfectly? Well, when Tamayura debuted in Empress CS for the PS2, it was in fact the same chart as this so-called bugged or swung chart we see today. In fact, it's been over 10 years since this song was introduced, and was only introduced in the arcades during Tricoro, so that would be around 2012. And people only got accustomed to the non-swung version of the chart. It just goes to show that it's been so long since Empress CS that people basically forgot about how the chart was originally, including myself. So that begs the question, should these charts be considered different? If it all depends on monitor check, I'll let you decide for yourselves, but I think it's interesting to point out the world record for this song was done on the non-swung version. And finally, there's one last problem with 180 BPM 16ths. If you would like to take a look at these pictures I have below, you can notice that the notes are slightly staggered. Now, if you recall from the last video where I explained how magic BPMs work. 900 is divisible by 180, so therefore 180 BPM 16ths should be considered magic, right? But then why are these notes staggered? Now this is pretty complex, but long story short, it all goes back to how the game converts milliseconds into frames using your monitor check as a reference. So to really understand how this works, we're going to have to dig deep into the game's files. Alright, so we have the chart file for X open right now, and the first thing I'm going to do is Control F, look for an integer number, and I'm going to input the note count for the another chart, which is 1952. And you can see right here, this is where it comes up. This is hex for 1952. You can see right here that this will display what the integer number is in 16. I'm gonna look at this byte in particular, 10, because this is what the event type that tells us that this is the note count information we're looking at, and this is exactly what we want. Now, I'm gonna scroll down here a bit and look at these first 4 bytes. This is the timestamp in milliseconds. This is the first event. This is 1,333 milliseconds in. I'm looking for an event type of 0. This is where a note gets placed. And we can see here, this value is 5. And you might be wondering what these values do. Now, if you look at the chart, this first note should be on key 6. And that is because it's 0 index. It's like 0 is 1, 1 is 2, 2 is 3, 3 is 4, 5 is 6, 6 is 7, and then 7 is the scratch. So this is the first note. Now we're gonna look at the next event type. So these first 4 bytes tell us the millisecond timestamp where everything occurs. And so let's look for it here. Do we have it? Yep. So this timestamp at 1417 and this event type is 0, and this node is a 4. The first timestamp we found a node is 1333, and this one over here is 1417. So I'm going to write this down here. And I'm going to do this with another note. Let's see if we can find it. And we found it right here. So this is pretty easy. And this third note has a timestamp of 1500 milliseconds in the song. So we do that. And then just for good measure, I'm going to do one more just to iron this point in. So it's actually right below here. So these first 4 bytes tell us the timestamp, the 5th byte, the event type, and this is a 2. So this is 1583. Okay. All right, so I have my calculator opened up. So I'm going to do 1583, subtract the 1500, that's 83. I really don't have to do that, but let's do 1500, subtract by 1417, that's a difference of 83. So I'm gonna write this down. So this is a difference of 83. Now let's do 1417, subtract 1333, and we have 84. So if you notice here, we have a pattern of 84, 83, 83, and you might be wondering, what is the significance of this? The beginning of the song, if you recall, is just 16th notes, and according to what I said, it should be 180 BPM should be a magic BPM because there's only a 5-frame gap. But as you can see here, the gaps in milliseconds are not exactly equal. That is because if we do 5 divided by 60, we get 0.08333333 repeating, right? So in the game's chart files, it has to offset this difference. The tick sizes don't allow that to happen, so the game has to do its best by adding 1 every 2 notes. So it should go 84, right? 83, 83, then this should be 84. And then 83, 83, then 84. So it's going to keep repeating like this for as long as the 16th notes last. Alright, so my original plan was to show the actual subroutine the game uses to convert milliseconds into frames, but I thought that was a little too over excessive. So what I have is just this. And now this is just a script I wrote to help simulate what it would be like to have a 2-minute 180 BPM 16th note stream at whatever monitor check setting I have, and it will show all the irregularities that happen, all the times that the notes become staggered. And so how this script works is that, so this part right here is just simulating the 2-minute section, and I'm creating it based off of what it would look like if we had the timestamps in milliseconds. So you see right here I have one section being 84, and then the next two notes will be 83 millisecond gaps, and then back to 84. And then what I have for this part is where all the magic happens. So let me go through this really quickly. And this is just the FPS you get from monitor check. And the tick value, this is just set to 1000 because there's 1000 milliseconds in 1 second. And now we have the most mysterious value, and this is what I call the fudge. And the reason I call it the fudge is that we're not really sure what this number does. We found it in the game's code, and we can only guess that this number is just used to fudge the value ever so slightly before the milliseconds get converted into frames. So this is where all the math happens. And so what we're doing is we're taking our timestamp and dividing it by the value we get if we divide the tick value, which is 1000, divided by our monitor check FPS. And then finally, we add on the fudge. And the last step is that we round down. So that's how monitor check works. And so what I'm going to do to show you how this works is I'm going to set the fudge value to 0. Then I'm going to run the script. So you see here that we have a bunch of irregularities that happen at the beginning of the song. So normally at 180 BPM, there should be a 5-note frame gap, assuming a 16th note quantization. But instead we have 4, 6, 5, 4, 6, 5, and we have this happening for about 8 seconds of the song. Now watch what happens when I add the fudge value back in. So this only happens at the very end of the song now. Overall, you won't really notice this unless you really pay attention to how the notes are coming at you. And it might be more noticeable if you're playing a song that's just a straight 180 BPM note stream like Verflut. And if this problem really bothers you, there isn't really much else I can say other than to just play on a cab or setup that's as close to 60 FPS as possible. Because while the fudge value, it tries to do its job, it doesn't account for every single possible FPS. And I'll show you on a more irregular FPS. So what happens when we have 59.945? I've seen this monitor check value pop up on Uniana cabinets that I've seen videos of. So I'm gonna try this and we're gonna see what happens. So this happens at really irregular intervals. So you have something that happens for about less than a second here, and then it happens again around 25 seconds in, and then 42, and then pretty much a minute in. So it's pretty irregular. They only happen for about 6 or 7 notes, so that's about less than a second. It is a little unpredictable. So yeah, there really isn't much else to say about the subject. I think that pretty much covers it. I'd like to give a few shout outs for people helping me make this video. So the first shout out I'd like to give is to Cystem. It was actually his idea for me to make this video about specifically this problem at 180 BPM 16th note streams. So big shout outs to him. Nereid, or what I like to call him, I just like to call him Nerd. Nerd helped me out a lot with fact checking and making sure I had the right idea about how to explain what's going on. And he was the one who discovered the fudge value, so all the credit goes to him. And finally, the last person I like to give shout outs to is Saxonpike. because he has a really good web page detailing how the 2DX node chart files work. So if you want to take a deeper look into that, I'll link that into this description. And if you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them and I'll be glad to answer them to the best of my abilities. And thanks for watching. Take care, everyone.